Hi there everyone, my name's Chelsea and I run a program called Know Your Status through the Saskatoon Tribal Council. Our whole program is to bring education and awareness to certain topics so that you guys can protect yourself against infectious diseases. So what we're going to talk about today is how to prevent germs and how we can stop them from spreading between people. So what we're going to be talking about today are germs and the different types of them. We're also going to talk about how germs make us sick and how they're passed between two people. We're going to talk about ways to prevent germs from being spread, and we're going to talk a little bit about the immune system, which you guys might have already heard of. So right off the bat, here's a definition. Germs are microscopic organisms or life forms that exist everywhere. You have germs all over you, not all of them are bad, and not all of them will make you sick, but some might. So basically, germs are these tiny, tiny little life forms that exist, and they can eat, and they can drink, and they multiply, and they exist everywhere in our lives. And some of them are good. We have germs in our stomach that help us digest food, but some of them are bad. So you guys know about the flu and how when someone gets sick with the flu, that makes them really sick. So those are all thanks to germs. So here are some types of germs. We have bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungus. So bacteria are little organisms that are alive. Some, like the ones living in your stomach or your gut, are good, whereas some, like E. coli, you might have heard of, can cause illness. Bacteria are usually the ones that we're scared of when we say that we want our food to be fully cooked or clean of all visible dirt. That's why we wash our fruits and our veggies before we eat them, is because we're worried about that bacteria. On the other hand, viruses are usually mostly bad. They're organisms that can't make copies of themselves, so they can't multiply without using a host. So bacteria, they can live fine on their own, but viruses need to live in someone or something else in order to double themselves. They often do cause illnesses, but sometimes their illnesses are specific to a certain species. So for example, there are viruses that could affect monkeys or bats that don't necessarily affect humans. Parasites are another type of germ. They're small living creatures that get their food at the expense of their host. So here we can think about animals that suck blood. So that's taking blood from humans and giving it to fleas or ticks or leeches. So those are parasites. Sometimes they can cause illnesses. And lastly, fungus or fungi are a type of germ. So fungi make copies of themselves, and in doing so, like when they double themselves, they produce these tiny little spores, and inhaling these spores can cause some illnesses. So how do these germs like viruses and bacteria and parasites and fungi make us sick? Well, first of all, they exist in the wild. So in other humans, animals, or even in the environment, these germs are naturally occurring. We run into them all the time, and sometimes we go to step number 2, where the germ somehow gets into our body. This is often through the nose, mouth, eyes, or a puncture in the skin. So the germs exist naturally in the environment, and then they get into our bodies. Once the germ is in our body, it starts to multiply. So 1 becomes 2, and 2 becomes 4, and 4 becomes 8. You know, that sort of thing, until there's a lot of germs. And sometimes when a germ is infectious or when a germ causes an illness, what happens is these germs produce a toxin or a poison in very small amounts. So when there's only 1 germ, there's very little toxin there. But as you can see in step 5, when there's lots of germs, the small amount of poison that's produced by each germ adds up. So all of a sudden there's a lot of toxin or a lot of poison in our bodies from these germs. And at this point, that is when we start to get sick from the toxins in our body. So sometimes they just give us a sore throat. Sometimes they damage liver organs like your liver. Sometimes they make us throw up. There's all sorts of different things that these toxins can do to us, and it's specific to each different type of germ. But basically, that's how a germ makes you sick. It exists, it gets into your body, and as it starts to multiply, the toxin that it produces multiplies with it, and that is what makes you ill. So there are two general categories of how germs are spread, and these are indirect and direct. So when a germ goes right from the source to the person that is infected, we call this direct spread. When there is a step between the source of the germ and the person that gets infected, we call this indirect spread. So an example of these is if someone sneezes right on you, right in your face, and then you get sick, that's considered direct spread. But if the person sneezes on their pencil and then gives you your pencil, and then you use that pencil, and then later you touch your face with your hands that have touched the pencil, that is indirect spread. There are a few more specific ways of how germs are spread between people. One of those ways is through body fluids. So lots of body fluids can contain germs, like spit, snot, blood, and other fluids from our reproductive systems. Another way that germs can spread is through the air. So when someone sneezes or coughs, the droplets that linger in the air can float and are breathed in by the next person. Germs can also be spread through food and water. So water can pick up germs in the river or after it's gone through its treatment, whereas food, so raw meat, can contain germs naturally, or vegetables and fruit can get germs from water. If they're grown in contaminated water, they could contain those germs as well. Germs might also spread through animal bites. Bites from bugs like mosquitoes, ticks, and fleas can pass germs, but also bites from animals like dogs or bats could spread germs. Surfaces have the potential to spread germs as well. When a body fluid like spit from a sneeze or uncooked food are on a surface, you can pick up these germs with your hands. And then finally, germs can spread from mums to babies. So sometimes an illness can spread from a mum to her baby during pregnancy, through breast milk, or as it's born. So now we're going to play a little game. We're going to talk about one of the last slides ways of spreading germs between people, like all those different ways, and we're going to match it to one of the two general categories. So our two general categories, remember, are indirect and direct. So we're going to start with body fluids. Now I want you guys to think, are body fluids a direct or an indirect way of transmitting germs between people? So this might have been a bad one to start off with, because if you said both, you would be right. Body fluids can be spread to other people directly, but they also could be spread to other people indirectly. The next one is air. Is air an indirect or a direct spread? If you said indirect, you would be right. So the air itself acts as that second step that's needed for indirect spread of germs. Food and water, is this an indirect or an indirect spread? If you said indirect, you would be right. So the food or the water acts as the second step from where the germs came from to before they actually infect a person. So it goes source, food or water, and then person, which makes it indirect spread. Our animal bites, so ones from like bats and dogs, are those direct or indirect? If you said direct, you were correct. So when an animal bites you, like a dog or a bat or a beaver, all sorts of mammals, if they bite you directly, they would be directly transmitting germs from their saliva or even their blood to you. So that's direct transfer. What about bug bites? Are those indirect or are they direct? Bug bites are actually indirect. So the germs that exist in bugs naturally don't cause illness in humans. What happens is a bug will bite a species that is closer to human, so something like a monkey or maybe a dog, and after it bites, or sometimes gophers, surprisingly, are closer to humans, after it bites those animals, it could pick up germs from those animals, which it then transfers to us when it bites us. So in that way, the bug is the step between the source, which is the mammal, and then it goes bug, and then it goes human. So that's indirect spread. And then we have surfaces. Is that direct or indirect? So surfaces are indirect. The surface acts as that second step between the person who's infected, and then the surface, and then the person who's yet to be infected. And then lastly, mom to baby. Do we think this is direct or indirect? From mom to baby is direct spread, so the mom directly passes it to the baby in her uterus. So there we have it. Those are how those different ways of spreading germs fall into the two categories. Now I'm going to throw another definition at you. So I keep talking about how germs are spread between people, but we're going to talk about the word transmission or transmit. So this is a fancy version of the word spread. Transmission is when a germ passes or spreads from one person to another. We might also say that it transmits from one person to another. So if you hear me say that is its form of transmission or that is how it's transmitted, that's how I'm saying scientifically that's how the germ spreads. So transmission or transmit is equal to the word spreads or passes. So let's brainstorm here. What have you done in this last year to stop germs? I'll give you guys about 20 to 30 seconds to think about what you've done throughout COVID to stop germs from spreading or transmitting to one another. So some of the things that you might have done this last year include washing your hands, wearing a mask, and staying home and reducing the number of people you come into contact with. So now we're going to start talking more about how we prevent germs. So in the last slide, I showed you 3 things that you might have done in this last year to help prevent the spread of COVID, which is a germ. And now we're going to talk about some other different ways that we can prevent the spread or the transmission of germs between people. Because you might have come up with some more ideas that I didn't cover on the last slide, so let's see if we get to them here. So the first one is hand hygiene or washing your hands. Hand hygiene is when you properly wash your hands, so 20 seconds with soap and water, or using an alcohol hand sanitizer to get rid of all the germs on our hands. So you want to make sure you're scrubbing under your fingernails, in between your fingers, on the fronts and the backs of your hands. When there's germs on our hands, we tend to touch our faces, and then those germs can get in our eyes, nose, and mouths, and from there they make us sick, like we talked about at the beginning. By practicing proper hand hygiene or washing your hands, it stops 3 different types of germ transmission. So it stops the transmission of germs through body fluids, through food and water, and through surfaces. So just think, remember that example I gave you when you used someone's pencil that they had sneezed on? If you wash your hands before you touch your face after touching the pencil, you won't get sick. Or if you wash your hands after handling raw meat, you won't get sick. And if you wash your hands after touching publicly available handles and stuff, so like doorknobs or escalator handles, make sure you're washing your hands after those, otherwise you might get sick. So physical barriers are another way that we stop germs from spreading or transmitting between people. Physical barriers are really awesome because they protect not only the person wearing the barrier, but others around them as well. They make a physical wall that germs can't get through. We make barriers out of all sorts of things like material, so think about masks, plastic, like shields, nitrile like gloves, and latex like condoms. The type of transmission that is prevented by using a physical barrier includes airborne transmission, bug bites, so think about wearing long sleeves to prevent mosquitoes from biting you, body fluids, and surfaces. Fewer contacts. So staying home helps decrease your chances of infection transmission because you are less likely to come in contact with someone who has an infection. So think about this. If 1 in every 10 people has a cold and you see 1 person a day, you are probably not likely to come into the contact with that 1 person who had the cold. But if 1 in 10 people have a cold and you saw all 10 people that day, you would have definitely come into contact with that 1 person who has a cold. So by staying home, you have fewer chances of running into somebody who has a cold or can spread germs to you. So the type of transmission that fewer contacts can stop is airborne transmission. So people sneezing and coughing, you experience less of that when you see less people. Surfaces, so you're in contact with fewer surfaces touched by other people when there's less people. And body fluids. So the next one is to not let it into your body. So sometimes we're not near a sink or hand sanitizer, and the best thing that we can do for ourselves is to not touch our face. When we fall into the sidewalk and we get a cut, we rinse it out to make sure that there's no gravel or dirt on it, and then we put a bandage on it until it fully heals. So that's another way that we make sure that germs aren't getting into our cuts or like directly into our bodies. So we don't want germs in any cuts in our body. We don't want germs in any gaps in our body. So when I say gaps, I'm talking about those holes like your nostrils and your eyes and your mouth. By not letting it into our body, we're preventing the transmission of germs through surfaces and also through body fluids. The next thing that we can do to prevent the transmission of germs is to not share certain things. So objects contain germs from other people. And there's some objects that we just shouldn't share because they have a higher likelihood of containing someone else's germs. So these objects include things that have been in someone else's mouth, have someone else's blood on them, or have someone else's snot on them. Some germs are passed through different body fluids, and some of these body fluids, like blood, are more dangerous than others. So the type of transmission that's stopped by not sharing certain items includes surfaces and body fluids. So we also want to be careful around animals. In some cases, animals can carry infections that transmit or spread to us. And this could happen when they bite us or just when we touch them. So, for example, the biting, I'm sure you guys have heard about rabies, and there's different animals out there that could carry rabies like raccoons or bats, and sometimes even dogs. Lots of dogs are vaccinated against rabies though, because we don't want it to spread to us. So that is how animals could spread through bites, and other animals, when we eat them or when we handle them, could spread infections to us. So I'm not sure if you guys have heard about this one, but sometimes people don't want to have pet turtles because turtles can sometimes have salmonella, which makes us sick, but it doesn't make the turtle sick. So animal bites is the type of germ transmission that is prevented by being careful around animals. Another way to prevent germs from transmitting is to not let bugs bite you. Bugs don't have infections on their own that spread to humans, but what happens, like I had said before, is that a bug can bite an animal that's closer to humans, whose infection can spread to humans, and carry the infection from the first animal to the human when it bites the animal and then when it bites the human. Bugs that pass these infections are often those bloodsuckers, so mosquitoes, fleas, ticks, sometimes leeches. All of those little parasites, or those bugs that bite you, could potentially transmit germs from something else to you. So by not letting bugs bite us, we are stopping the transmission of germs through bug bites. We also want to be careful of what we're eating. So humans eat all sorts of animals which carry a chance of transmitting infections to us if not properly cleaned or done so in a sanitary environment. We also eat a lot of fruits and veggies, which carry a chance of transmitting infection if grown in contaminated water or not properly cleaned before eating. And we know that food eventually goes bad, and this happens because bacteria starts to eat away at the food. We shouldn't eat food that's gone bad, because what we're doing then is we're eating food that's been eaten by bacteria. So there's a lot of bacteria in food that goes bad, because that's what causes food to go bad. So by eating rotting food, we're actually eating a lot of bacteria, and that can make us sick. So by being aware of what we're eating, we're stopping the transmission of germs through food and water. And now we're talking about vaccines. And so these are one of the most foolproof ways of preventing transmission. Vaccines work by exposing our immune system to one small piece of the germ so that we know how to fight it when we find the real thing. So it's kind of like in video games when we fight smaller or weaker enemies before we advance our way up to the final boss. That's how vaccines work. We expose ourselves to like one small little piece of the germ so that when we find the real germ, our bodies know how to fight it. And vaccines stop the transmission of all types of germs through body fluids, through air, through surfaces, through food and water, through bites, and from mom to baby. Another thing that we can do is to sneeze away from others. So we've talked a lot about ways to protect yourself from infections, but it's also our job to protect others if we have an infection. So if you need to sneeze or cough, you should do so away from somebody else. Or better yet, cover your nose and your mouth. I'm sure you guys have been taught to do the vampire cough where you sneeze into your elbow and it kind of looks like a vampire sweeping his cloak up to hide his face. That protects other people from our germs. If you sneeze on a surface, it's good practice to wipe it off. And don't share those things that have been in your mouth if you're not feeling well. So what type of transmission does sneezing away from others prevent? It prevents transmission through body fluids, through the air, and through surfaces. The next thing you can do to prevent other people from the spread of your germs to them is to tell someone if you don't feel well. Let the people around you know if you're not feeling well, because then they can protect themselves. So tell people you live with, and they might let you stay home, and if you can't stay home, tell your friends so that your friends can make sure that they're washing their hands and not sharing things with you. This will stop the transmission of germs through body fluids, through surfaces, and through the air. And the last way to prevent the spread of germs or the transmission of germs that we're going to talk about today is through medication. So medication will help prevent the spread of an infection by treating the infection before it has the chance to spread to somebody else. If a sick person gets the medication they need, their infection will go away and they can't pass that infection on to somebody else. Medications prevent the spread of germs or the transmission of germs through body fluids, air, surfaces, food and water, bites, and from mom to baby. And we have another question here. Your body has a system that helps us to fight off germs. Do you remember what that body system is called? And I'll give you about 20 seconds to think about it. So if you guessed the immune system, you're right. The immune system. Do you guys remember talking about it? It's our body's natural way of protecting us against germs. So a little bit more about the immune system. When germs get into our body, our antibodies realize that they're not supposed to be there and attach to the germs. When the antibodies attach to a germ, it signals to a certain cell called a white blood cell to come and attack the germ. White blood cells can either neutralize or eat the germ so that it doesn't do any more damage. Sometimes the immune system can't keep up, and that's when we end up getting sick. Sometimes the immune system is struggling to keep up, and we need medication to help us get rid of the infection. And sometimes we can prepare our immune system to fight off germs by using vaccines. So that's why vaccines are so cool, is because it lets our immune system say, hey, here's something that could be a threat. Get ready for it. And our immune system does, so that as soon as we encounter it for real, it's like, oh, I know that's a threat, and it can attack it right away. So I hope you guys enjoyed learning about germs today, what they are, how to prevent them, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for listening, and you can follow us on social media if you'd like. We are Know Your Status. See ya!